Have you ever imagined being abandoned by the person you loved most in life? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. My name is Margaret. I'm 74 years old, and my own daughter dumped me in a nursing home like I was some old, disposable object. But what she didn't expect was that this elderly mother still had plenty of fight left in her. This is a true story of betrayal, resilience, and justice. An emotional story that'll make you think about family, love, and the boundaries we need to set even with those we love. What would you do if you discovered that your own flesh and blood abandoned you not out of love, but out of pure greed? How would you react upon finding out they were planning to steal everything you'd built? The total humiliation I experienced could have destroyed me, but instead it transformed me into someone much stronger. And the ending of this story, well, you'll need to find out. But to understand how I got here, I need to tell you how it all began. You know that moment when you completely trust someone and suddenly the ground disappears beneath your feet? That's exactly what happened to me that day. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 74 years old, and I never imagined my own daughter would be capable of doing something so cruel to me. Claire showed up at my house with that forced smile, saying I was going to spend a few days with her, that it'd be nice for us to spend more time together. I, like a mother who'd feel ungrateful for doubting her own daughter, just smiled and packed my little suitcase, happy at the idea of being close to her again. During the car ride, something was different. Claire nervously gripped the steering wheel, bit her lips, avoided my gaze when I asked simple questions about how things were going at home. I tried to make conversation, but she answered in monosyllables, and that heavy silence started to tighten my chest. Was she having problems in her marriage? Was there something wrong she didn't want to tell me? My mother's heart was already starting to worry, but I could never imagine what was about to happen. When the car stopped, I looked out the window and felt my stomach turn. This wasn't my daughter's house. It was a huge building, with a discreet sign at the entrance, overly manicured gardens, and elderly people sitting in wheelchairs on the porch. A nursing home. My heart raced, and I turned to Claire, searching her eyes for some explanation that made sense. She couldn't even look at me properly, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't a visit, it was abandonment. Claire, what are we doing here? My voice came out shaky, almost disappearing. She took a deep breath, gripped the steering wheel tightly, and finally looked at me. But her eyes were cold, distant, as if she'd turned off any feelings. I don't have a choice, Mom. You're getting in the way of my life. The words came out of her mouth like stabs, each syllable tearing through my chest. She'd already signed the papers, already decided everything without consulting me, without even having the courage to warn me beforehand. I stood there, paralyzed, while she got out of the car and grabbed my suitcase from the trunk. My mind couldn't process it. What do you mean I was getting in the way? I who raised this girl alone, who worked twice as hard after her father died, who gave up so many things to make sure she had everything. I tried to grab her arm, beg her to explain properly, but Claire just shook her head and handed my suitcase to a nurse who was already waiting at the door. She mumbled an almost inaudible "sorry" and went back to the car, without looking back even once. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching her car disappear around the corner, taking with it all the years I dedicated to being a mother. The tears started falling before I could even fully understand what had happened. The nurse, with that professional and overly kind tone, touched my shoulder and said she'd show me my room. Room? What do you mean, my room? I had a house, I had a life, I had a daughter, or at least I thought I still did. As I walked through the hallways of that place, the smell of disinfectant mixed with institutional food invaded my nostrils, and each step felt heavier than the last. Other elderly people glanced at me, some with pity, others with that empty expression of those who'd already given up waiting for visits. Would I become one of them? Would Claire really never come back? The total humiliation of being discarded by my own daughter burned inside me, a pain that not even the worst losses of my life had caused. When the door to the room closed behind me, I collapsed. I sat on the edge of that strange bed, in a room that smelled of mothballs and loneliness, and I cried like I hadn't cried in years. They weren't just tears of sadness. They were of anger, of confusion, of feeling like my entire life had been thrown away, like something that was no longer useful. And worst of all was knowing that the person who'd done this to me wasn't a stranger. It was my own daughter, the little girl I'd rocked in my arms, who I taught to walk, who I loved unconditionally. How can someone do this to their own mother? The first days in that place were the hardest of my entire life. I just couldn't accept that this was happening to me, you know? I'd spend hours lying in bed, staring at the white, dull ceiling, trying to find some explanation that made sense for all of this. My mind always went back to the same place. Where did I go wrong as a mother? What did I do that was so terrible to deserve this abandonment? The answers never came. Just the heavy silence of that room and the sound of my own muffled sobs in the pillow. I could barely eat, and when the nurses tried to talk to me, I just nodded, pretending everything was fine. But nothing was fine. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, my heart would race with the foolish hope that it'd be Claire coming to get me, saying it had all been a terrible mistake. But the footsteps always kept going, and I'd sink back into that denial that was consuming me from the inside. How could an ungrateful daughter do this? That question echoed in my head nonstop. At night, it was even worse. The silence of the nursing home seemed to amplify every memory, every good memory that now hurt like a punch to the stomach. I remembered when Claire was little, after her father died so suddenly, leaving us alone in the world. She was only 7 years old, and I had to become both father and mother at the same time. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make sure she had everything. A good school, decent clothes, some joy amid our pain. I sacrificed myself, gave up my dreams, my own life, and for what? I remember there was a time when Claire got sick, a serious pneumonia that almost took her away. I spent entire nights beside her bed in the hospital, holding her small, warm hand, praying to God not to take her away too. I promised in those days that I'd do everything to protect her, that she'd never suffer if it depended on me. And I did it, you know. I raised her alone, without anyone's help. And she grew up strong, smart, beautiful. I thought we had an unbreakable bond, that sacred connection between mother and daughter that nothing could destroy. But there, in that cold, impersonal room, I realized that maybe I'd been fooling myself my whole life. Maybe I was just an elderly mother who'd fulfilled her role and was now useless. Was that what Claire thought? That I was a burden, a nuisance, something disposable? The pain of that conclusion was much greater than any physical pain I'd ever felt. It was like they ripped out a piece of my soul and threw it in the trash, along with all those years of love and dedication. I felt invisible, as if I'd ceased to exist the moment that car turned the corner. Other people in the nursing home tried to be nice, but I couldn't reciprocate. How could I? My world had collapsed, and I was trying to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. Every morning I woke up was a battle against the urge to simply not get up anymore, to surrender to that deep sadness that seemed endless. There was a moment when I looked in the bathroom mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. My eyes were sunken, with dark circles under them. My face seemed to have aged 10 years in a few days. I was just a shadow of the strong woman who'd raised a daughter alone, who'd faced so many storms and come out with her head held high. Now I was there, broken, discarded, not understanding how I'd gotten to that point. The total humiliation of being abandoned hurt more than I could express in words. And worst of all was the loneliness. Not that loneliness of being physically alone, because the nursing home was full of people. It was a much deeper loneliness of knowing that the only person in the world who should be by my side had chosen to abandon me. I felt like a tree uprooted, without ground, without purpose, just waiting for time to pass. But something inside me, deep down, hadn't completely died yet. Something small, almost imperceptible, was starting to stir, a spark that I didn't yet know existed. While I was there, drowning in that endless sadness, Claire was at home, living a completely different reality. She wasn't suffering, wasn't feeling remorse, wasn't losing sleep thinking about the elderly mother she'd abandoned in a nursing home. No, she was celebrating. That's right, you heard it, celebrating. At that exact moment when I was crying alone in a strange room, my daughter was toasting with champagne in her newly renovated living room, planning the bright future she thought she had ahead of her. Her husband David was sitting on the new couch, That super expensive couch she insisted on buying, even though they were in debt up to their necks. He raised his glass and smiled at her with that air of complicity that makes me nauseous just imagining it. "So you finally did it, huh? Solved the problem with your mom," he said, as if I were a problem to be eliminated, not a person, not the woman who raised his wife. Claire gave that satisfied little laugh and responded with something that, if I'd known at the time, would have destroyed me even more. "She doesn't need that old house, David, and I need a better life." The words came out of her mouth with a frightening coldness. Old house? That house was the only asset left from my marriage, the place where I raised my daughter, where every corner had a memory, a story. But for Claire, that was just an old property that was getting in the way of her plans. And what plans were those? Selling my house to pay off the debts she and her gold-digger son-in-law had accumulated with unnecessary renovations, designer clothes, and expensive dinners at fancy restaurants. David leaned forward, excited about the conversation. "And the business? Did we get the capital we need?" he asked, and I can imagine the greedy gleam in his eyes. Claire nodded, proud of herself. "As soon as I sell Mom's house, we'll have enough money to open that boutique I've always wanted. It'll be perfect, honey. We'll finally have the life we deserve." The life we deserve. As if they deserved anything built on top of my pain and my abandonment. Worst of all is that Claire didn't even show a shred of guilt. She justified everything in her head as if she were doing the right thing, as if I really were a burden that needed to be removed from the way. "My mom's old, David. She doesn't need that much space. Can't take care of that house properly anymore. At the nursing home, she'll have care, company. It'll be better for her." She lied to herself, building this false narrative so she wouldn't have to face the truth, that she was abandoning me out of pure greed. They spent hours talking about their plans, about how they'd decorate the boutique, about trips they'd take when the business started making a profit. Not once, not for a second, did Claire mention worrying about me, wondering how I was adapting, missing her own mother. I was just a piece that had been removed from the board, so her game could continue. And the worst part is that she thought I'd never find out, that I'd stay quiet in my little corner until I died, making everything easy for her. The gold-digger son-in-law even suggested they visit real estate agents the following week. "The sooner we sell, the better. The market's hot right now," he said, as if he were talking about some investment, not the house where his mother-in-law had lived for decades. Claire agreed immediately, already mentally calculating how much money would go into the account. Neither of them stopped to think that house was still mine, that I was still alive, that I had rights. For them, I was already dead, just waiting to be buried. Meanwhile, I was at the nursing home, blaming myself, wondering where I'd gone wrong, thinking that somehow I deserved this. If I'd known what was happening behind my back, if I'd known that my ungrateful daughter was scheming to sell my house while pretending to care, maybe the pain would have been less, because at least I'd know the truth. But the truth would still take a few days to reach me, and when it did, it'd be through a conversation that would change everything. Because sometimes the worst betrayals come from the people we love most, and you need to hit rock bottom to finally open your eyes. It was on a Tuesday morning that everything started to change. You know, I was sitting alone in the cafeteria, listlessly stirring a bowl of oatmeal that tasted like cardboard, when a woman sat right in front of me without asking permission. She was in her early 70s, short gray hair, and those bright eyes full of life that contrasted completely with the dull atmosphere of the nursing home. "How long are you going to sit there drowning in self-pity, dear?" she said, straight to the point. No beating around the bush. I lifted my head, surprised and a bit offended. Who was this woman to talk to me like that? "Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but someone needs to give you a shake," she continued, extending her hand. "My name is Olivia, and before you think I'm nosy, I've been through exactly what you're going through. My son dumped me here 3 years ago, along with his gold-digger daughter-in-law, who just wanted to get her hands on my house." I felt my heart tighten. She knew? How did she know? Olivia smiled with that understanding way of someone who'd already cried all possible tears and was now on the other side. "It's easy to recognize the look, my dear. The look of someone who was abandoned by the person they loved most." In the following days, Olivia practically adopted me. She'd show up in my room every morning, drag me out of that bed where I wanted to hide from the world, and show me that nursing home didn't have to be a prison. "Look, Margaret, you can choose to die in here, or you can choose to live," she'd say, while taking me to activities I didn't even know existed. There were painting classes, reading groups, even gardening in the backyard. Simple things, but that somehow started to fill the giant void Claire had left. The first time I really smiled for real was in a painting class. Olivia had convinced me to go, even though I insisted I had no talent for it. But when I picked up the brush and started putting colors on the canvas, something strange happened. It was as if each brush stroke carried away a piece of the pain, you know? It wasn't magic, it wasn't instant healing, but it was a breath, a moment when I wasn't thinking about the ungrateful daughter who abandoned me, but about the colors, the shapes, the possibility of creating something beautiful even amid so much ugliness. Olivia had the wisdom of someone who'd walked difficult paths and survived to tell the story. "You know what my mistake was, Margaret? It was thinking my life ended where my son decided, as if I only existed because of him," she told me one afternoon while we were having tea in the garden. "It took me a whole year to understand that I was still a complete person, with desires, dreams, the ability to be happy. Your value doesn't decrease because someone was incapable of seeing it." Those words pierced something inside me, a truth I needed to hear but didn't know. Little by little, I started getting out of bed with less weight on my back. I started talking to other people, participating in activities, taking better care of myself. It wasn't complete happiness, far from it, but it was a start. It was as if I was slowly remembering who I was before I defined myself only as Claire's mom. I was Margaret. I'd survived my husband's death, raised a daughter alone, working to the bone, overcome 1,000 storms. And if I'd accomplished all that, why couldn't I also overcome this total humiliation? Olivia introduced me to other women who had emotional stories similar to ours. There was Dorothy, who was abandoned by both her sons. There was Ruth, whose family only showed up when they needed money. And there was Helen, who didn't even have family anymore, but who smiled every day as if life were a gift. Each one of them was a living lesson in resilience, that it's possible to rebuild even when everything seems lost. And for the first time since I'd arrived there, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could also find a way. But Olivia wasn't just a friend who offered a shoulder to cry on. She had that perceptive way of someone who knows that words of comfort aren't enough, that sometimes action is needed. "Margaret, have you thought about talking to the social worker here?" she asked me one day, with that tone too casual to be casual. "Grace is great, you know. She helps people understand their rights, those things." Rights? What rights? I'd been abandoned, been discarded like old trash. What rights could an abandoned elderly mother have? But the little seed of curiosity had already been planted, and something told me that conversation was about to change everything. Grace was a woman in her mid-40s, with a warm smile, and that professional but human way of someone who really cares. When Olivia took me to her office, my heart was racing, partly with fear, partly with a hope I didn't even know still existed inside me. "Margaret, it's a pleasure to meet you," Grace said, pointing to the chair in front of her desk. "Olivia told me a bit about your situation, and I'd like to talk to you about some important things. Do you know exactly what documents you signed when you arrived here?" The question caught me by surprise. Documents? I hadn't signed anything. Claire was the one who'd handled everything. Grace opened a folder and started explaining things I never imagined. Apparently, to admit me to a nursing home against my will, Claire would need specific documents, medical evaluations, proof that I was incapable of taking care of myself. "Do you have any diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's, any condition that prevents you from making decisions?" she asked, looking directly into my eyes. I shook my head, confused. No, I was perfectly lucid. I just had a broken heart. "Then your daughter had no legal right to leave you here without your full and informed consent," Grace said, and those words fell like a bomb. My mind started spinning. Had Claire lied? Had she forged something? Grace continued explaining that I still had all rights over my house, my belongings, my life. "Margaret, you're not your daughter's property. You're a capable adult, and nobody can simply discard you like that." I felt the tears coming back, but this time they were different. They weren't just from pain. They were from anger, from indignation, from realizing I'd been deceived in a way I never imagined. The ungrateful daughter didn't just abandon me, but did it illegally, treating me as if I were an object without free will. That's when Grace dropped the bomb that would change everything. Margaret, I need to tell you something I discovered doing some routine checks. Your daughter contacted a real estate agency last week. My blood froze. Real estate agency? She's trying to sell your house, and from what I could gather through some contacts, she already has interested buyers. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet again. But this time it was different. It wasn't just sadness, it was fury. How dare she? How dare the gold digger daughter-in-law and gold digger son-in-law plan to sell my house while I was here, thinking I deserved all this abandonment? Grace placed her hand over mine, a gentle but firm gesture. She can't sell without your authorization, Margaret. The house is in your name, and you're fully capable. Any attempt by her to forge your signature would be a serious crime. Forge my signature? Would my own daughter be capable of that? The answer hurt, but it was obvious. Yes, she would be. After all, she'd already been capable of dumping me in a nursing home and leaving without looking back. What difference would forging some papers make? What can I do? I asked, feeling a strength growing inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Olivia, who'd been sitting beside me the whole time, squeezed my hand with that smile of someone who knew this moment would come. You can fight, dear. You can take back your life. Grace agreed and started outlining a plan. She knew lawyers who worked pro bono with elderly people in vulnerable situations, people who could help me regain control over my property and my life. But we need to be strategic, Grace warned. If Claire finds out you're organizing yourself, she might try to speed up the sale or make things difficult. We need to act carefully and discreetly. In the following days, Grace helped me get in touch with a lawyer named James, a serious but kind man who was outraged when he heard my true story. This is financial and emotional abuse, Margaret, and we're going to make sure your daughter answers for this, he said firmly. We started gathering documents, proof that I was fully capable, medical records showing there was no legal reason for me to be there. Each paper we signed, each strategy we planned, was like recovering a piece of my dignity that had been stolen. Olivia was with me every step of the way. She reviewed documents with me, explained legal terms I didn't understand, and most importantly, constantly reminded me that I had value, that I deserved justice. You're going to leave here, Margaret, and when you do, it'll be with your head held high, not as someone who ran away, but as someone who took back her life, she'd say, and I was starting to believe. The total humiliation I felt at the beginning was transforming into determination, into strength, into a purpose I hadn't had in a long time. Claire thought she'd gotten rid of me, but she had no idea of the storm she was about to face. The day finally came. After weeks of preparing myself, gathering strength and courage, I was ready to take back my life. James got a court order that allowed me to leave the nursing home immediately, and more than that, it confirmed I had full rights over my house, and that any attempt to sell without my consent would be invalidated. Grace and Olivia were with me that morning, helping me pack the few things I had, and I felt a mixture of nervousness and determination burning in my chest. Are you ready, Margaret? Olivia asked, squeezing my hand. I took a deep breath and nodded. More than ready. I was being reborn. James had discovered through the real estate agency, which was alarmed to learn Claire was trying to sell a property without the owner's authorization, that on that exact day, she'd scheduled a visit with potential buyers. How convenient, right? My daughter was so confident, so sure I'd stay quiet in my little corner while she destroyed my life, that she didn't even bother hiding her plans. We'll get there around 2 in the afternoon. That's when the visit is scheduled. James explained, and I agreed. I wanted to see her face. Wanted her to know that her elderly mother wasn't as disposable as she thought. When the car stopped in front of my house, my heart almost jumped out of my mouth. It was the first time I'd returned there since that horrible day when Claire deceived me. The yard was somewhat abandoned. The plants I cared for so lovingly were wilted, and that broke my heart. But there was no time for regrets. James gently touched my back. Let's go, Margaret. Your house, your rules. I walked to the front door, took out the key I still carried with me, because Claire never imagined I'd have it, and opened the door. The familiar smell of my house enveloped me, and for a second I almost collapsed again. But no, I was strong now. I wasn't alone anymore. I entered the living room, and what I saw made me even angrier. Claire had changed everything. My furniture, those that had history and memories, had been replaced or pushed to the corner as if they were trash. There were new photos on the walls, different decoration, as if she were already living there, as if the house were already hers. She really thought she'd get away with it, I murmured to myself, feeling the indignation grow. That's when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Claire was there, talking animatedly with a couple, probably the buyers, showing the rooms as if she were the owner. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and walked toward the voices. Each step was a reconquest. Each movement was me reappropriating what had always been mine. When I entered the kitchen, Claire had her back turned, gesturing while talking about the beautiful renovated cabinets she'd had done. The couple saw me first and seemed confused. That's when Claire turned around, still with that fake salesperson smile on her face. When our eyes met, the smile instantly disappeared, and her face went white as paper. "Mom?" The word came out in a choked scream, a mixture of shock and panic. "How did you get out of there?" She looked behind her as if expecting someone to appear to explain, as if this were a nightmare and she'd wake up any moment. The couple of buyers looked from me to her, clearly lost in the situation. "I left because I wanted to, Claire," I answered, and my voice was firm, much firmer than I imagined it would be. "And I think you'd better explain to these people that this house isn't for sale because it's not yours." The gold digger's son-in-law appeared running from the living room, probably heard my voice. David froze in the kitchen doorway with that face of someone who just saw a ghost. "This isn't happening," he murmured, but it was happening, yes. Claire tried to regain her composure, that manipulative way of hers trying to take control of the situation. "Mom, I can explain. You don't understand. I was doing this for your own good." "For my own good? For my own good?" The audacity of this ungrateful daughter had no limits. "You might have left me in that place, Claire," I said, taking a step forward, feeling all the strength Olivia and Grace helped me find. "But this house is still mine." The couple of buyers started backing away, realizing something was very wrong. "Look, we'll come back another day," the man said, uncomfortable, already pulling his wife by the arm. Claire tried to stop them, tried to save the situation, but it was too late. They left quickly, and suddenly it was just me, Claire, and David in that tense kitchen. The silence was deafening. Claire opened and closed her mouth several times, looking for words that wouldn't come. She knew she'd been caught, that her plan had crumbled right before her eyes. And best of all, she still didn't know even half of what was coming. Claire finally managed to gather words, but what came out of her mouth was exactly what I expected. More lies. "Mom, you don't understand. I had to do this. We're in debt. We're desperate." She was trying to sound vulnerable, as if she were a victim of circumstances. But I was no longer that broken woman she left at the nursing home. I knew the truth now, and I wasn't going to let her continue deceiving me. "Debts you created on your own, Claire. Expensive renovations, designer clothes, fancy restaurants. And now you wanted to use my house to pay for all that greed?" My voice was calm but firm, and each word was a stab to her conscience. David tried to intervene, that gold digger's son-in-law always thinking he could manipulate the situation. "Look, Margaret, we really were thinking about your well-being too. That house is too big for you to take care of alone, and with the money from the sale you could—" I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "You don't talk to me about my well-being, David. You're the one who convinced my daughter to abandon me in a nursing home so you could get your hands on my property. You think I don't know? You think I'm an idiot?" His face turned red, and he looked away, unable to face me. Even he knew he'd crossed the line. That's when the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. James entered through the front door, carrying a folder full of documents. Claire and David looked at each other, the panic evident on both their faces. "Who's that?" Claire asked, her voice already failing. "This is my lawyer, dear. Someone who really cares about my rights, unlike my own daughter." James greeted everyone with a professional nod and opened the folder on the kitchen table. "Margaret, do you want me to explain, or do you prefer?" I took a deep breath. I'll explain. She needs to hear this from my mouth. I looked directly into Claire's eyes, those eyes that once looked at me with love, but now only reflected fear and guilt. I found out everything, Claire. I found out you tried to forge my signature on the sale documents. I found out you lied to the real estate agency, saying you had legal power of attorney to sell my house. I found out you admitted me to a nursing home without any medical documentation to justify it, treating me as if I was senile or incapable. Each word that came out of my mouth was like lifting a giant stone off my back. Claire went pale, so pale I thought she was going to faint. Mom, I didn't. You didn't what, Claire? Didn't think I'd find out? Didn't think your elderly mother still had the capacity to fight? The anger I'd held for so long finally found a voice. You know what hurts the most? It's not even the greed, Claire. It's the coldness. It's knowing you were capable of looking me in the eyes, deceiving me, taking me to that place, and leaving as if I were trash, as if all the years I dedicated to you meant nothing. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't going to stop. She needed to hear all of this, needed to understand the dimension of what she'd done. James placed a document on the table, turning it so Claire could see. This here is an attempted forged signature on the real estate agency documents. Document forgery is a federal crime, Claire. You could get up to 5 years in prison for this. Her face was completely white now, her eyes wide with pure terror. David took a step back, as if wanting to distance himself from the whole situation. I just needed... It was out of desperation. Claire stammered, the tears starting to run down her face. But they were tears of fear, not genuine remorse. Desperation, I repeated, feeling a mixture of sadness and anger. You abandoned me out of desperation? You tried to steal my house out of desperation? No, Claire. You didn't abandon me out of love. You didn't do this worried about me. You abandoned me out of pure greed, because I was in the way of your plans, because maintaining a relationship with your mother was work, and it was easier to dump me in a corner and pretend I didn't exist anymore. Each word seemed to break something between us, a bond that perhaps could never be fully restored again. And the truth is that part of me didn't want to restore it anymore. Claire collapsed in a chair, sobbing, her hands covering her face. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. But that apology sounded empty. Too late. Motivated by fear of consequences, and not by true regret. I looked at her, this woman I raised, who I loved more than myself, and I realized I didn't know her anymore. Or perhaps the more painful truth was, maybe she'd always been like this, and I simply didn't want to see it. You destroyed everything, Claire. Everything we built together, all trust, all love. You threw it away for money. For a better life you wanted to build on my back. The total humiliation I felt in that nursing home now transformed into clarity, into strength, into certainty that I deserved much more than an ungrateful daughter like her. I stood there looking at Claire crumbling in that chair, and a part of me, that part that was always a mother, that always wanted to protect, almost gave in. Almost. But I couldn't live trapped in this cycle anymore. Couldn't let the love I felt for her turn me into a doormat. Get up, Claire, I said, with a firmness that surprised even myself. She lifted her wet face, confused, maybe expecting me to say everything was okay, that I forgave everything and we'd go back to being mother and daughter like before. But things would never be like before, and she needed to understand that. I've made a decision, I continued, feeling each word weigh on my tongue. I'm going to sell this house. Yes, but I'll sell it because I want to, in my time, and the money will be used to rebuild my life. A life where I don't depend on you, where I'm not waiting for crumbs of attention from a daughter who clearly doesn't value me. I saw Claire's expression change from desperation to something even worse, the understanding that she'd lost everything, not just the money she wanted so badly, but the mother who was always there, always unconditional, always available. Mom, no, please, we can talk about this. I shook my head, feeling my own tears threaten to fall, but I held firm. There's nothing more to talk about, Claire. You made your choices. Now you'll have to live with the consequences. David tried to approach, but James positioned himself between us, making it clear that conversation had limits. Margaret has every right to sue you both for attempted fraud and financial abuse of the elderly, James said, serious. But she's decided not to do that. Yet. as long as you leave this property immediately and don't attempt any more contact without her authorization." Claire jumped to her feet, desperate. "Mom, you can't do this. I'm your daughter. We're family." The irony of those words didn't go unnoticed. "Family?" I repeated, feeling the bitter taste of the word. "You remembered we were family now, Claire. When you dumped me in that nursing home, were we family? When you were planning to sell my house behind my back, were we family? You only remember we're family when you need something from me." The truth of those words echoed through the kitchen, and even David lowered his head, unable to defend the indefensible. Olivia had taught me something important in those weeks at the nursing home. That unresolved anger becomes poison inside us. That holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I didn't want to live the rest of my life embittered, consumed by my own daughter's betrayal. But I also wasn't going to pretend nothing happened. Wasn't going back to that unhealthy dynamic where I erased myself to make her happy. "I'm not going to live trapped in the anger I feel for you," I said, more to myself than to her. "But I'm also not going to pretend everything's okay. You broke something that might never be fixed again." Claire took a step forward, her hands extended as if wanting to touch me, but I instinctively backed away. That simple gesture said more than 1,000 words. There was a barrier now between us, a wall built brick by brick with each lie, each betrayal, each moment of contempt. "I thought you'd always need me," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "But I was the one who lost you, wasn't I?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. Yes, she lost me, not because I died, not because I left, but because she threw me away and now discovered that some things, once lost, don't come back. "You have 15 minutes to gather the things you brought and leave my house," I said, looking at James, who confirmed with a nod. "If there's any attempt to take anything that belongs to Margaret, it'll be considered theft," he added, always professional. David was already moving, grabbing his jacket, the car keys, clearly wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. But Claire remained standing, looking at me as if expecting me to change my mind, as if expecting a mother's love to make me forget everything and open my arms. But I wasn't going to do that. Not this time. While they gathered their things, I walked through my house, touching the walls, the windows, reconnecting with that space that had always been my refuge. Each room had a memory, and yes, many of them included Claire, the little girl running through the living room, the teenager studying at the kitchen table, the young adult getting ready for prom. But these memories were mine too. They were part of my story, and I wasn't going to let her betrayal taint all of that. When I heard the front door close, I felt something strange. It wasn't just relief, it was freedom. For the first time in months, I was in my house, in my space, owner of my own life, and nobody, not even my ungrateful daughter, could take that away from me now. A few days passed since that confrontation in the kitchen, and I was starting to feel at home again. I cleaned every corner, rearranged the furniture the way they'd always been, removed all that fake decoration Claire had put up. It was as if I was erasing her traces, recovering my identity that had been suffocated. But even with all the justified anger, even with all the pain still throbbing in my chest, I knew I needed to do something for myself, not for her. I needed to find a way to move forward without carrying this giant weight on my back. That's when I heard the doorbell ring on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I looked through the peephole, and my heart tightened. It was Claire. She was alone this time, without the gold digger son-in-law by her side, and she seemed smaller somehow, hunched under an old umbrella. For a moment I considered not opening, pretending I wasn't home, but something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe that remnant of maternal love that never completely dies, made me turn the doorknob. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly, her voice almost disappearing in the sound of the rain. "I know I don't have the right to be here, but I needed to talk to you. Can I come in?" I stood there for a few seconds that felt like hours, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, protect my heart from more pain. But another part, that part Olivia had taught me to cultivate, knew that completely closing this door would be closing a part of myself too. "Come in," I finally said, stepping aside to let her through. "But only because it's raining, and I don't want you using this later as another story about how your ungrateful mother left you in the rain." The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were honest. Claire entered, dripping water on the floor I'd just cleaned. We stayed in the living room, me sitting in my favorite armchair, her standing, awkward, not knowing what to do with her hands. "I rehearsed this 1,000 times in the car, you know," she began, her voice trembling. "Rehearsed what I was going to say, how I was going to apologize. But now that I'm here in front of you, I realize there aren't enough words to fix what I did." I remained silent, waiting. She needed to say this, and I needed to hear it, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. "I ruined everything, Mom. I let greed, David, financial problems. I let all that be more important than you, than the woman who raised me alone, who gave up everything for me." The tears started rolling down her face, but this time they seemed different from the tears of fear and desperation from that day in the kitchen. They seemed more genuine, deeper, coming from a place of true regret. "I've spent these days unable to sleep, Mom. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face that day I left you at the nursing home. I see the way you looked at me with that mixture of confusion and pain, and I can't forgive myself for it." She collapsed on the couch, her hands covering her face. "I became exactly the type of person we used to criticize together. Remember? We'd see news about children who abandoned their parents, and we'd be outraged. And I became that. I became the ungrateful daughter we despised." I felt my throat tighten, my own tears threatening to fall. But I needed to be strong, needed to make it clear that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, didn't mean going back to what it was before. "Claire, look at me," I said, and she slowly lifted her face. "I believe you're sorry now. I believe you're suffering with what you did. But you need to understand something. Regret doesn't erase what happened, doesn't erase the days I spent crying in that nursing home, feeling discarded, wondering where I went wrong as a mother." My voice was firm, but the tears finally started to fall. "You broke me, Claire. You broke something inside me that might never be the same again." "I know, Mom. I know," she sobbed. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person, trying to understand why I was capable of doing this. I ended things with David, you know. I realized he only made what was already worst in me worse. I started therapy. I'm trying to understand my mistakes, my greed, my coldness. It was a start, I knew. It didn't fix anything, but it was a start. I'm not asking you to forgive me now, or for us to go back to being like before. I don't even know if that's possible. But I wanted you to know that I know what I did, that I take responsibility, and that I'll carry this with me forever." I got up from the armchair and went to the window, watching the rain fall outside. Olivia had told me something important. Forgiving isn't for the person who hurt you, Margaret. It's for yourself. It's so you can sleep at night, so you don't spend the rest of your life embittered. But forgiving also doesn't mean being a fool again. Doesn't mean letting the person hurt you twice. I took a deep breath and turned to Claire. "I forgive you, Claire," I said, and I saw her eyes widen, a flash of hope mixed with disbelief. "But not for you, but for me, because I deserve peace, because I'm not going to let your betrayal poison my heart for the rest of the life I have left. But you need to understand," I continued, taking a step toward her, "that forgiveness doesn't mean things will go back to how they were before, doesn't mean trust will come back with a magic snap, or that I'll forget what you did. Forgiveness means I choose not to carry hatred, but it doesn't mean I choose to let you fully into my life again." I saw her face contort with the pain of those words, but she needed to hear them. "If you want to rebuild something between us, it'll have to be little by little, with a lot of work, with a lot of proof that you really changed. And even then, Claire, even if you change completely, some things won't be the same anymore. That's the weight of our choices." Claire stayed silent for a long moment, processing everything. Then she stood up, wiped the tears from her face, and looked at me with a maturity I hadn't seen in her in a long time. "Thank you, Mom, for listening to me, for forgiving me even though I don't deserve it, for being stronger than I ever was. You've always been the most incredible person I've ever known, and I was too stupid to value that." She walked to the door, grabbed the umbrella. "I'll give you space. I'll give you time. But if one day you want to talk or need anything, I'll be here. Not to ask you for anything, not to demand anything, just to try to be the daughter you always deserved to have." And with that, she left. leaving only the sound of rain and the echo of an emotional story that maybe, just maybe, could have a new chapter someday. 6 months passed since that rainy day when I forgave Claire, and my life was unrecognizable in the best possible way. I sold the old house, the one that carried so many good memories but also the pain of betrayal, and bought a cozy little house in a quiet neighborhood, just 3 blocks from Olivia's house. It was smaller, easier to take care of, with a small garden but full of sun, where I planted roses, lavender, and those white daisies that always reminded me of simpler days. Every morning, I'd wake up and look through the kitchen window at that garden, and I'd feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Genuine peace, that peace that comes from within, not from external circumstances. Olivia became much more than a friend. She became my soul sister, my adventure partner in this phase of life that many people think is just about slowing down and waiting for the end. Not at all. We discovered an energy we didn't even know existed. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we'd take yoga class at the community center. Yes, yoga at 74 years old, and I could do positions that would make my 30-something ungrateful daughter break a sweat. On Wednesdays, we'd go to book club, where we'd discuss novels, biographies, even some mysteries sometimes. And on Saturdays? Saturdays was our volunteer day at the Senior Support Center. It was in volunteering that I found my true purpose. You know, Grace, that social worker who helped me leave the nursing home and recover my life, invited me to help other elderly people who were going through situations similar to mine. "Margaret, you have a true story of resilience that can inspire other people," she said, and at first I was scared. Did I want to relive all that pain helping others? But when I met the First Lady, a woman named Dorothy who was 80 years old and had been abandoned by her 3 children, and I saw her eyes fill with hope when I told my story, I knew I'd found my place. Every Saturday I'd go there and talk to elderly people who felt discarded, invisible, worthless. I'd look into each one's eyes and say, "You're not finished. I thought I was finished too, but look at me now. Life doesn't end when someone abandons us. It just takes a different direction, sometimes even better." And it was amazing to see the transformation, to see people who arrived hunched over, defeated, start to straighten their backs, smile again, believe they still had something to offer the world. Each emotional story I heard made me realize how we're not alone in this pain, how family abandonment is much more common than society likes to admit. It was on one of those Saturdays that something unexpected happened. I was in the center's kitchen, making coffee for everyone when Grace appeared with that little smile of hers. "Margaret, there's someone here who wants to talk to you." My heart gave a little jump. Would it be Claire? I hadn't seen her in almost 2 months, since that last quick call where she told me she was doing well in therapy. I dried my hands on the apron and went to the reception area, and there she was. But it wasn't the arrogant and cold Claire who abandoned me, nor the desperate and broken Claire from that rainy day. It was someone different, lighter, more genuine. "Hi, Mom," she said, shy, holding a small box. "I know you said you needed space, and I tried to respect that, but today's your birthday, and I couldn't let it pass without acknowledgement. I'd even forgotten it was my birthday. I'd been so busy living, enjoying each day." Claire approached and handed me the little box. Inside was a simple necklace with a heart-shaped pendant and a handwritten card. "I'm not asking to become part of your life like before, Mom. I just wanted you to know that I think about you every day, that I'm working to be better, and that if one day you want to give me a chance, I'll be here." I looked at her, at this woman who was my daughter, but who I was learning to know again, in a different way, with healthy boundaries and realistic expectations. "Want some coffee?" I asked, and I saw her eyes shine. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending where everything goes back to being perfect. It was a beginning, small, cautious, but real, and maybe that was exactly what we needed. Not going back to what was, but building something new, more honest, more mature. I introduced Claire to Olivia, to the other volunteers, showed her the work I was doing, and for the first time, I saw genuine pride in her eyes, not that performative pride from before, but something true. When the day ended and I returned to my little house, with that necklace around my neck and Claire's letter tucked in my purse to read calmly later. I sat in the garden and looked at the sky that was turning orange with the sunset. Olivia had sent me a message. Proud of you, friend. You found your way. And it was true. I had found it. Not the way I imagined. Not without pain. Not without losses, but I had found it. I lost a daughter for a while, I murmured to myself, feeling the gentle breeze on my face. But I found myself again, and that nobody can take away from me. The total humiliation had transformed into strength, the abandonment into independence, the pain into purpose. And if this wasn't the life I planned, well, maybe it was even better than I could have imagined. And so ends this story of pain, resilience, and rebirth. Margaret lost a daughter for a while, but found herself and discovered she was worth much more than any abandonment could make it seem. She proved it's never too late to start over, that being elderly doesn't mean being disposable, and that forgiving isn't forgetting, but rather freeing yourself from the weight that keeps us from moving forward. Sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those we least expect, but it's precisely in those falls that we discover our true strength. And you? Have you been through something similar? Have you ever felt abandoned by someone who should love you unconditionally? What would you do if you were in Margaret's place? Would you forgive or cut ties forever? Tell us here in the comments, because your story can help someone who's going through the same pain right now. We need to talk about these things. Lift the veil of perfection that society places over family relationships and show that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. If this story touched your heart, if you felt every emotion along with Margaret, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss other emotional stories that bring life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships. Because everyone has a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Until next time, and remember, you're worth much more than any abandonment tries to make you believe.